Welcome everybody to the Kidlit Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider, the Children's Writing Monthly. And if you're a first timer with us, we're really glad you're here with us tonight. If you are new to us and you would like to get on our mailing list to hear about all of our upcoming events and who's going to be on the socials, etc., please go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet. You can see the URL on your screen there. You will get a free ebook from us. We are actually about to start our 32nd year in business in May. It'll be our 32nd anniversary, May 1st, of publishing Children's Book Insider, which makes me really old. But so what we have done is sort of compiled our best beginner knowledge into this ebook, and it's your gift for signing up for our list, and then you'll hear about everything else we do. So now we do celebrate. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is when my listeners have sent me great news that they want to celebrate, such as they found an agent, they found a critique group they love, they finished the first draft of their manuscript, they got a publishing contract, anything great. And I announce it here and we all celebrate. Now, last week I had like 4 great celebrations. This week I have 0, which is fine. I don't expect you all to be like producing all the time, but I just want to say, I'll give you the email in a minute that you can send me your celebrations. If you're new, I want to hear from you and we'll celebrate next time with you. But I have a couple things to celebrate, so you got to listen to my stuff. First of all, this I love. I didn't do this, but for those of you who are unaware of it, there is a campaign to petition the New York Times to create 3 children's nonfiction bestseller lists, picture book, middle grade, and young adult. That kind of will match, they have fiction bestseller lists for various children's categories. But these 2 professors of language and literacy at prestigious universities, these 2 women, they wrote this great letter to the New York Times. It was signed by over 900 industry people, and it went to the Times today. And if you want to support this, the hashtag Kids Love Nonfiction is what they're using, and you can talk about it on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever, use the hashtag. And if you want to read the full letter to the New York Times, which is really good, it has a lot of great information in it about the importance of nonfiction for kids, I created a bit.ly link here, bit.ly/Kids Love Nonfiction. You can go there and read the letter. So let's hope the New York Times listens and they start posting nonfiction bestsellers as well, because there's a lot of great nonfiction writers out there, many of whom watch this webcast, many of whom I've interviewed. Go back to the replays on writeforkids.org and listen to them talk about their great books. And this is something we are doing tomorrow. So I really wanted to tell you about it. If you are not on the list, you would not have heard about this. This is a paid webinar we are doing. It's called Breakthrough: Following the Hero's Journey to the Creative Transformation You Deserve. Todd Mitchell, a very talented writer, and he's also a professor of English and creative writing at Colorado State University. He has created this wonderful system where he's used the hero's journey, story structure, to walk through how to transform yourself creatively as a writer. And he's used his own experience as a way to develop this through having a creative breakdown, which he will talk about tomorrow on the webinar, and how he built himself back up. So this is awesome. It's going to give you inspiration. It's going to give you some fuel to relight your creative fire after the pandemic. And it's $47 for the live event, and it will be recorded if you can't make it live. But after tomorrow, the replay will go up for sale on our Writing Blueprint site, but it will be $67. So this is how you save $20, is by definitely signing up for the live event. You've got a bit.ly link there on your screen. And again, this is tomorrow evening, same time as we do the social, and it will be recorded, and you will get a big PDF takeaway with it as well. So I hope to see you there. So here's where you're going to send us your good news. Mail at writeforkids.org and put the word celebrate in the subject line, and I will feature you on a future Kidlit social. And remember, no celebration is too small. We want to be there with you every step of your journey because every step is important. Okay, 2 links of interest this week since I didn't have a whole lot of celebrates to take up the time. So Leslie Newman, who was my guest last time, if you recall in her intro, I said she won writing contests from both the Dog Writers Association and Cat Writers Association. I thought that was so cool. So she sent me these 2 links. She said, you all should go on there and check it out. They each have writing contests every year. And they just celebrate people who write about dogs and cats in various capacities. It's awesome. And since we're doing nonfiction tonight, this is very relevant. So, and again, when we send out the replay of this Kidlit Social, we have all the links under the replay. If you're on our list, you'll get that tomorrow. Also, Jane Friedman, I talk about her blog a lot here. It's awesome. And she has something called the Hot Sheet, which is a subscription-based newsletter, which is amazing. It keeps you up on the industry comings and goings, which is really important. But she did a roundup of all the new agents, publishers, and imprints from 2021. And she created this big list, and she's making it available for free. So if you are putting together your submission list, you're thinking about submitting soon, and you're trying to remember who belongs where and what new imprints came up and do they take submissions or not, this is your starting point. So I created a bit.ly link, bit.ly/newpubs2021, and that'll take you right there. Please consider subscribing to the Hot Sheet newsletter. Comes out every 2 weeks, hotsheetpub.com. It's not expensive. I can't remember what it is because we subscribe, but it's not expensive. Great information. Okay, now my guest. So Laurel Neme, who is a PhD from Princeton, which means she's way smarter than I am, has camped in the Kalahari, investigated walrus carcasses on Alaska's Bering Sea beaches, and explored the Amazon jungle with the Brazilian Federal Police, all in pursuit of knowledge and a better story. Isn't that amazing? So she's the author of Animal Investigators, How the World's First Wildlife Forensics Lab is Solving Crimes and Saving Endangered Species, and 2 picture books, nonfiction picture books for kids. The Elephant's New Shoe, about the rescue of a baby elephant who needs a prosthetic foot, and Orangutan Houdini. For some reason, I have trouble saying those 2 words together. About an adult male orangutan who was awarded an honorary membership in the American Association of Locksmiths because he kept outsmarting his zookeeper friend and getting out of his locked enclosure to go visit the elephants. So we're going to talk about those. She's also a regular contributor to National Geographic, mangabay.com, which is a great website of science articles. Really cool. The Huffington Post and the New York Times Magazine for Kids, and she was just nominated by National Geographic for a Pulitzer Prize in International Reporting, together with her colleague Jeff Barbee, for their series of articles on oil drilling in the Okavango. I hope I said that right. She'll tell us all about that. But go to her website, laurelneme.com, and you'll see a whole list of her articles of where she's been published, and you can read all of them online. They're amazing. So, Laurel, come on the social. I'm excited to have you here today. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the social. And, I'm just want to say congratulations again on your nomination for a Pulitzer in international reporting. That's really cool. Do you know like how long it takes for the process, the judging, and when you find out and all of that?
I don't actually. It was a little bit of a surprise because the nomination was submitted sort of, we found out a little bit through happenstance. And so I think just people forgot to tell us or something. It was, anyway, but we're super excited about it. And I think you find out in April or something.
Okay.
But truthfully, I'm not quite sure of the whole process. I'm sure that there must be
It's
screening.
not your first Pulitzer, or it's your first Pulitzer is what you're saying.
Yeah. Hopefully it's my first Pulitzer. So no, but I think what was, you were talking about celebrations, and I mean, this is a big one, but just and it's also sort of funny because just the fact that they felt, with all their experience, that they felt like the series deserved that in their experience, that they put it forward. It feels like, wow, that's great. And it's not something, I put on my resume or something because it's not done,
Yeah.
but it's just a nice, all along the way. I think you're exactly right. We have to celebrate when something good happens, even, if it's an editor giving some positive feedback saying they really like something, even if you get rejected, the fact that they like a manuscript or, it,
Yeah.
I just love that you do that. Totally.
Well, writing is a long, solitary process. And so having these little benchmarks along the way is so important to keep us going and to know that you have the support and the good wishes of the rest of the community, I think is so valuable. And writers are so good at supporting each other, I think. So it is fun to do that.
Especially the Kidlit community, I
The
have to
Kidlit
say,
community for sure. Yes.
it's really,
Cool. Well, I just want to remind people who are here, if you have questions for Laurel, we'll get to Q&A at the end. So you can put them in the Q&A box, please. If you put them in the chat box, it'll scroll by and I won't catch them. Okay, so let's get started. So your Pulitzer nomination is for international research. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about research. So a lot of your articles focus on issues in other countries, particularly Africa. And that's a long way away from Vermont, where you live. So I wondered, what is generally the starting point of your research for a piece? Is it, obviously, where do you start? And do you end up having to get on a plane and actually go to the place that you're writing about? Or are you able to do most of it from home?
yeah. And it's funny because my work, before I started writing, I was in a policy field, and so I traveled a lot, and I worked in 13 countries in Africa and other places as well. And so I've been to a lot of places, and I've lived in some of them, so I have a lot of contacts. So that was one thing. But even when I don't, I just look up who I would want to talk to and then contact them. And most people are quite willing to talk about what they do. It's
Mhm.
very rare that someone will say no to someone interested in learning about what they do.
Mhm.
I think the advantage of also doing articles is that they're quick hits, and not the Okavango work, but all the other stuff. A lot of the other stuff is the non-investigative stuff is, you can do research, and within a reasonable period of time, you end up having an article that sort of satisfies the people you interviewed because it looks like a product. With
Mhm.
books, it tends to be harder, a little bit harder. So I think setting expectations that, oh, this isn't a book and it takes a while, and
Right. Yes. Yes.
That's,
And especially if you're putting together a proposal for a book, you haven't sold it yet, but you want to do some interview just to get preliminary information, I think you have to make it clear to them, this might not be a book. I mean, do you ever do that, or do you just sort of assume it's going to be a book?
oh yeah, no, I think setting expectations is, sort of
Mhm.
important. On the other hand, people are still really willing to talk
Yeah.
with you and explain what they do.
Mhm.
And I think that they're also very complimented that you think their work is interesting enough to be in a book.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
and and so I think a lot of people are afraid to contact people they don't know to talk to them about their work because it feels big, but it's, you get all the really juicy stuff that way. You get the feel of things.
Mhm.
You get the inside story. You get all the connection.
Right.
Um,
So do you do most of your interviews like on a Zoom call like this, or over the phone, or how do you conduct a lot of them?
I guess it depends what it's for. I always prefer Zoom, actually, because you can make at least a connection. I mean, I prefer
Yeah.
in person, but but
Oh,
that's
well, yeah,
possible.
obviously.
So so a lot of it is preferably on Zoom, because then you can
Mhm.
make the connection and it feels like you're there, and so that's always good. Otherwise, phone or WhatsApp. I do so much international stuff. WhatsApp and Signal are other ways I communicate, which are
Hmm.
secure, secure types of messaging
Right.
things.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's that. But I think the connection is important, and the follow up, and even, trying also, oftentimes, depending on the people, if they're super busy, uh, trying not to make it too long and maybe do multiple calls over time. Uh,
Hmm.
Making sure that you've read as much as you can and prep some questions ahead of time, but also letting the conversation flow.
Yeah.
Because clearly they have some interesting things to
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
And some of the questions that work every time for almost every circumstance for a children's book is, especially, is like, what's your typical day like?
Hmm.
And because that will lead you, like, I was interviewing Daphne Sheldrick who's she rescues elephants, and she has since passed, but she founded this Sheldrick uh, Wildlife Trust, and so a lot of orphaned elephants go through there, and she formulated a milk formula for baby elephants for rescues, because that's really
Hmm.
they can't digest a lot of things. So before that, most orphaned elephants were dying, and this whole system, because elephants need love from family. And I was asking her, what's a typical day like? And I was also saying, what's a typical day like, you know, earlier, when she wrote this memoir called Love, Life, and Elephants. And one of her days was always having tea, and they made cookies, and the orphan elephants would come and eat them. So I asked her for her recipe for those biscuits that were good for elephants, but good for people. And just like those little tidbits that were
Yeah.
so special, because then you feel connected. Like,
Hmm.
if you make those biscuits, you're going to feel connected, not just to her, but to her life, to that book, to elephants, just through this little simple.
And what a great detail, especially if that ends up in a children's book, and to be able to talk about making the biscuits, and then maybe even have the recipe in the back of the book.
Exactly.
Such a great detail.
So it's so that question of what's a day like can
Hmm.
lead you to some really
Yeah,
sort of fun
sure.
points, fun.
Well, and what you're doing is you're giving open-ended questions. So you're not directing how they're going to answer because you don't know. No, you want to find out stuff you don't already know as the interviewer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned investigative reporting as different. Is there a certain kind of research you do when you're investigating wrongdoing, or just give a couple titles of some of the articles you've written in the past that might have had that investigative tone to it.
Yeah, so the whole, we've written 7 pieces so far for National Geographic on this oil exploration in the Okavango, and they're all available on my website. On National Geographic has a paywall, so without the pictures, they're on my website.
Yeah.
And all of those are investigative.
Uh-huh.
And so and so what that is where things are hidden. The idea, this essentially what happened is there's this oil exploration in a very fragile wilderness area, which is in the northwest part of Botswana and the northeast part of Namibia. And the licenses, the governments in those 2 countries let the licenses sort of under the cover of COVID, and people didn't know about it. And we exposed, and then they got permission to drill exploratory wells. And so oil exploration doesn't necessarily have to be just that disruptive, but it can be it often is, or it can be depending on how it's being done and all of that. And Namibia has very good laws, but there's a lot of circumvention of the laws or the regulations. And so exposing that. So you have to really, to answer your question about when you're asking questions, really dig down into every bit of material you possibly can and know it backwards and forwards so that you can notice changes in websites over time and what that might mean, or, changes in statements, or exactly what the statement is. In those pieces, we're often comparing what the company says to what the company is doing on the ground to what it's also telling investors what it's doing. And there's a lot of differences between those. And in fact, probably at the end of this week or next week, we're having our 8th piece coming out, which will be a blockbuster, actually.
Oh.
And so anyway, so that involves a lot of it. And so then also that translates to when you're then interviewing people, you're getting, the questions are also open-ended, but you're also getting on the ground reporting, going there or talking with a lot of people who are on the ground to find out what they're seeing and documenting it. So you're needing much more documentation and verification.
Right.
And there's a whole system in the back between lawyers and fact checkers. So you better get everything right.
And so in a situation like that, where you might have sources who aren't thrilled about having their name in print, for example, does your editor, do you have to build up a relationship with an editor over time where they trust you, where you say, yes, I have the sources, but I can't divulge who they are? How does that work, especially with a magazine like National Geographic?
Yeah. And the articles have not been in the magazine. The articles have been on their news site. So just to be clear, but yeah, and in investigative reporting, you generally try not to use sources who will not give their name, but we have had situations where lives were threatened and things. So we did have to look at, balance, first we'd never disclose a name without that person's permission. So that just, we wouldn't do that, especially because a lot of times people are telling us information. So when people will tell us information, if they don't want to go on the record, which we often have, we try and source it a different way so we can verify it another way, which will always verify the information anyway. So, just because one person said that doesn't mean it's true.
Sure.
But if 2 or 3 people are saying that, then that passes the
yeah. Well, I think those are just good techniques for any kind of research that you're doing, whether it's investigative reporting or writing about a historical event or whatever. Just having that 2 or 3 sources saying the same thing, I think is so important to know you've got the right information. And we all know the internet will perpetuate wrong information very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think if someone is not on the record, then
Hmm.
it's too easy to not be able to verify it. I guess
Yes.
that's, and
Yeah.
so that's, we did have one story where it was a whistleblower and that person remained anonymous. But also we had a whole, we were able to verify all the information with written documentation, et cetera. So we were
Hmm.
able to keep this person anonymous, but still have all of it verified.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, um,
Well, it's all very
yeah.
exciting. Well, let's take a little turn here. I want to like sort of look at the big picture of your career because you write about so many different topics, but much of your work tends to center on sort of a few a few big areas like wildlife and the environment and how humans are often threatening or getting in the way of either of those. And you also write a lot about elephants, rhinos, great apes, those really wonderfully majestic creatures who seem to be particularly vulnerable to human missteps often. So these specialties, where did they sort of evolve from? Were these interests of yours that you've always had? Did they evolve over time? Did you get one assignment and then it just sort of a light went on and you're like, I love this, and you started pursuing other things? How did you kind of fall into these specialties?
Yeah, no, I loved animals as a kid.
Hmm.
That's the bottom line. And so in
Yeah.
some ways, I I evolved back toward it. So, I think going to school, college, I thought I wanted to be like Jane Goodall, but I thought, oh, who's gonna, that's not gonna make any money. So I went into, so I thought, oh, I'll maybe possibly teach, which is why I got the PhD, or go into policy. And I went into policy and I worked for government for a while, again, on environment and social and
Hmm.
environmental
Hmm.
aspects of
Hmm.
policy, and including wildlife. When you're dealing with wild places, well, wild animals are there. So
Right.
that thread has always been there. And so it sort of evolved into writing, because working for government and in the policy community, I started seeing the same issues come up over and over again, like hitting your head against the wall sometimes.
Yeah.
And when my first book came out, which was Animal Investigators, which is narrative nonfiction on the world's first wildlife forensics lab. I mean, that came from my work because I was seeing a lot of wildlife trade. It was sort of toward the beginning of a lot of the elephant crisis and ivory trafficking.
Hmm.
And so that book came out. So I came at writing sort of backwards in a lot of ways and backed into it. But in some ways it was like coming full circle, because I
Hmm.
always had wanted to do it. And that thread, you're exactly right. That thread of animals and the human interactions. And I have to say the articles work often leads into a children's book, or
Hmm.
it's all very much related, because I'll be
Yeah.
talking to someone for an article and they'll say something so intriguing, and then I think, oh, that would make a great story, and I find it,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is how the elephant's new shoe came about, is
Right, right, yeah. And I want to talk about that book in a minute. But I want to follow this thread we were talking about here. So it seems like a lot of times I talk to people who are sort of beginning their career and they want to become career authors. They want to get to the point where they're basically earning all or most of their income from writing. Okay, which is a great goal to have. But I always tell them, be willing to cast a wide net in what you write. You can't just work on your novel and expect that to support you forever. If you want to be a career author, you have to be writing constantly and writing for magazines and different kinds of magazines and turning that research that you do into several different projects. And it sounds like you kind of just almost instinctively did that. You had these interests that also gave you, because you studied them in school in a lot of ways, they gave you credibility as an expert. And then you started writing articles, and then you turn, some books came out of it, or, however, whatever order that came from. So when you're researching a topic, do you often look at it as like, how much can I get out of this? Is there a way I can turn this into 3 or 4 different paying gigs here with this research I'm doing, or does it just sort of happen organically?
I think I think it's a great idea to do. And that's what I've done. I mean, for a while I did a podcast that I just did myself. I did a local radio show that, again, it was on community radio, and I took my interviews that I did there and I made it into a podcast. And it's exactly what you were saying. So I was thinking about that. And you can still download all the episodes. And what I would do is I'd be like, it was the idea of having a product for somebody that I wanted to talk to. It was like, I may or may not want to do more with them, but it's like, oh, I find seahorses really interesting. Let me talk to a seahorse scientist. And so I'd talk to the seahorse scientist, and then maybe it wasn't that interesting, or maybe I didn't want to do more. I found it interesting, but I didn't want to do more with it, but I had a product. But then I would transcribe the interviews, and then I pitched Mongabay to put up articles that were interviews with scientists. So I would transcribe them and then edit them. And so a number of pieces were that for Mongabay, for that website. And then one of those turned into the Elephant's New Shoe, because I was talking to Nick Marks, who's the elephant rescuer who helped this elephant with a prosthetic foot. And, I had actually, before I talked to him, I had known about it because I've always prepared before I talk to somebody. But anyway, so I was so intrigued again with that piece of it. So I wrote the book, and that took years and years to come to fruition. So,
yeah.
So it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So it sounds like you're always kind of looking at, what can I do with this stuff that I have to get more out of it? And also what you're doing, this is especially important for nonfiction writers, to have some sort of platform. You have a way to speak to a lot of different people who become your audience. And even if not everybody, even if you're writing for National Geographic and those people won't necessarily be buying your children's book, an editor still looks at that and says, you have a platform, you are an established expert on these topics. And that means that you have credibility. And also that means you could go talk about these things at live events, for example, and bring your book with you. So I think that whether you were planning that far ahead or not, what you were doing was building a platform that eventually also helps your books, which I think is so important, especially for nonfiction.
I mean, I think that's why I started writing for National Geographic in the first place. And Mongabay is because after, like I said, I came at it backwards. And so I had a book, but no platform. And I realized I needed a platform. And so I started.
No, that's
easy to build, I mean, it's like, started unpaid with a lot of,
Well, yeah, you gotta put in the work.
And building relationships. And, I think that's the other thing about the interviewing is when you're talking with people and getting firsthand information for whatever it is, even if it's just for a little piece in your book, about, colors of uniforms that people wear, or, whatever it is, you sort of build a relationship, and that actually will also help you promote your book, or, gives it credibility, because I think you can also see where it doesn't exist, or if you know what you're doing, a lot of times you can see that it doesn't exist, and then you don't get that support. But there's so much support out there to be had. Like, people love to help you.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the actual writing. So, you were a journalist, and then you shifted gears and you wrote 2 children's picture books, nonfiction picture books. And the writing style is very different for those two
Oh, yeah.
things.
As you know, since you have personally helped me a lot.
So, how did you feel like you were sort of learning how to become a writer from step one again when you started working on picture books? Or were you able to use some of the stuff you learned in journalism in your picture book writing?
I think they all feed each other, but they're very different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still, I'm definitely evolving. And if you look at my two picture books, Orangutan Houdini is my writing has evolved and is so much better, in my opinion, with The Elephant's New Shoe. And I'm sure the next one will be, you're always sort of evolving. And I think it's hard. I think the journalism has been really difficult because yes, I can write and I can write narratively, but I also have too much information and want to include too much. So for me, that's really hard to get that thread of a story, especially when I find so much so interesting. It's hard to let go of your babies and get down to the nugget of the story. So it's
Yeah. Also, with a picture book, even with nonfiction, you have to have that emotional core to the story, where I think with journalism, you have to be a little more objective in a lot of ways. So was that a hard switch for you to do, or was that awesome that you could finally like bring out the heart of the story?
Yeah, no, I find it difficult. I love it. And I know when it hits, but I don't always get there, And in fact, a number of manuscripts that I've been working on for a long time, picture book manuscripts, that still, to me, are still missing the heart. And I don't know always how to, they're good, but it's missing
Yeah.
that je ne sais quoi, that sort of, and so for me, that's the hardest part. And then sometimes it just comes. So it's, and sometimes it's sort of a simple, the actual number of word changes are small, but they're huge in their impact.
Right. Well, and I think so much, especially if you're writing for the picture book audience, so much of it is your choice of topic and then how you find your way into the topic. I mean, with The Elephant's New Shoe, an orphaned baby elephant who's hurt, who had lost a foot in a trap, and who's alone and scared, kids are going to immediately feel, for that character. And so I imagine, I'm just guessing here, that probably finding the heart of that story was easier than some other topics you might have had.
Yes, exactly. It's easier. And it's also, but then in those cases, because they're also true, you sort of try and, okay, what's too much for the young reader? How do you not, how do you keep certain events possibly off the page,
Right.
yet still put it in back matter, or how do you deal with it, or where do you start? Sometimes it's a matter of where do you start the story to let that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so did you have any, were there any things you had in the manuscript that your editor asked you to take out because they were too much? Or had you made all those decisions before it was submitted?
No, it went through a lot of changes. That book was really interesting because it, I mean, I have to say Scholastic was fabulous with this book. And, the first changes were with my agent at the time, and cutting it down to that, behold, that magic 500 words or less. And then they actually had me expand it, triple it, Scholastic did, to add in a lot more that had been taken out. And then that editor left, and so we had somebody else, and so then they wanted it cut back by about 20% or something. So it still ended up a lot more than it had started with, but
Mhm.
that was because they had wanted more, but it was less than
Right.
they had me edit it too. So it was, yeah, so it went through a number of changes. And I
Mhm.
actually have to say something that's not written on the flap or anything is actually Nick Marks, the rescuer, and the elephant get royalties from that book. And which
Oh.
was an interesting deal that everyone said, my agent, everybody had said, no, you don't ask, don't get the deal, don't mess up your deal. Hasn't been done. And I just couldn't not ask, because
Sure.
they can always say no, but I
Yeah.
couldn't not ask. And when I asked, the editor was like, oh yeah, we're going to do this, this, and this. Is that okay? And it was far more than I was going to ask for. So I was like thrilled. And what it's done is like, it's now been published in Khmer, and so it's available in Cambodia. So it's helping there, and it's actually published apparently in Russian, although I don't have a copy yet.
Huh.
And
Oh.
but anyway, but it's just feels good that it it's not me sending money to that elephant. It's the
Mhm.
book
Mhm.
and his work. It just feels better, but
Yeah.
Scholastic didn't want to put it on the flap there were a bunch of reasons why they didn't do it. But
I think that's wonderful. I'm so glad you told us that. And yes, the book, it's more than sending money. The book is spreading their story, which is going to ultimately help them probably even more than the money, because it brings awareness
yeah.
to all of everything that was going on in the book. So that's amazing. That's great. That's great. I want to talk real quick about your first nonfiction picture book, Orangutan Houdini. Um, how much of that story was sort of there, or did you have to? Sometimes there's like a really great incident that you hear about, that's true, but you have to build a story around it with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The events have to have a progression and a payoff and all of that, even in nonfiction. Was that there with this story too, or did you have to really work at the structure on that one?
No, that one was there. I
Oh,
mean, it
cool.
was, and I had heard about the story. I mean, I have so many orangutan stories, it's ridiculous. And the and that was because I was writing on palm oil uh and clearing of land. I've written a lot of articles related to orangutans and their habitat and deforestation,
Uh-huh.
clearing land for oil palm plantations. And so once you once you tune into the subject, it's like when you're buying a car and you think you're going to get this one kind of car, then all of a sudden when you're driving around you see that car everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like with me, like with like I hear all sorts of orangutan stories because they're actually everywhere once you start to tune into it. And
Yeah.
so orangutans tend to escape in zoos, tend to escape a lot.
Hmm.
And so this was a story that I'd heard. And so it just, it's similar to a lot of other stories, but this one was fun because he actually became in the Association of American Locksmiths.
Right.
So yeah, it sort of wrote,
Yeah, well,
that one
that's
I didn't
great.
have to build.
That's great. But that just shows when you are following your interests in whatever, road you're taking with them at that time, if you keep your antenna up, you are going to come across all kinds of stuff that you can spin into other books or other articles. And as I was saying, is if you want to make your living as a writer, you have to have that antenna up all the time, I would imagine, just so you're constantly have things to work on and new projects.
Yeah, and I think that curiosity,
Yeah.
so, to sort of find some joy in all these stories or things you hear. And I mean, for me, passion is key because these stories take, it takes a certain amount to write it and then a certain amount, to do all the critiquing and editing. And then it just takes so long to get a book or even an article published, like you don't want to spend that much time on something you don't care about.
Yes.
uh, or you don't have some connection to. So that's just for me. But if I don't
Uh-huh.
like it, or I don't have a, some sort of connection. But a lot of times maybe the connection is just feeling joy and happiness with it. It doesn't have
Mhm,
to be
mhm.
some save, I mean,
Sure.
it could just be that you just really, it just makes you happy because the words are fun to say. And that's the passion. It just brings you joy, or your kid laughs at it, or, it could be
Mhm.
anything.
Yeah. So if you are focusing so much on writing articles about environmental crime and animals that are being hurt and that sort of thing, does that drain on you after a while? Or can you keep the passion going knowing that maybe your articles are helping and shedding light on these topics?
I think that's one reason why I started writing children's books. Partly I was hearing these stories, and partly almost as an antidote, because
Mm.
then I was focusing on the joy, or the positive, and it was letting me dig down into it more just for fun. So I found it really fun, and an antidote. I mean, now with this current series on the Okavango and the work until this destruction sort of abates, I'm it's having a big impact. So that does help, and it provides a lot of gratification, frustration too, but it's very draining. It's very, it can be very draining. And I really enjoy playing with the language, and and playing with the stories. And I think that children's books have the same impact, just it's maybe delayed impact. But I think it's really important to build that love. For me, it's that love for animals and reading and literacy and curiosity. And, even if someone, if you can capture someone because they love elephants, maybe they're going to start to just be curious about prosthetics, or maybe they won't, laugh at a kid when they have crutches, or, or be curious about why and what the injury is, or help, or, you don't know, and you don't know how it will impact things. But I think that children's books have a huge impact. You just don't always know what it is. And I
Yeah.
get away from that.
No, absolutely. And I think books like The Elephant's New Shoe also show the interconnectedness between animals and humans, and between the humans who wanted to help. People from all different professions and places were trying to help this elephant, trying to build a prosthetic that worked. And I just think that's that's just another wonderful thing to show children, that you know when all of these different people come together, they can do amazing things.
Yeah. And also I should say the power of, despite like being told no so many times, like it
Yes,
can't be done,
can't be
just
done.
still thinking, yeah, it can, like, and pushing, and that's a really good
Mhm.
message,
It's all wonderful.
and yeah, it's just,
And so that's where we were talking about the heart layer of the story. That's really a lot of what brings the heart to that particular book, are all of these themes we've been talking about. Yeah. So, um, real quick, because I want to get to a few questions here, but I know you also do school appearances, and you do elementary, middle school, and high school, right? You do the whole gambit with your appearances. And what kinds of things do you do in schools? What do you talk about with the kids in relation to your work?
yeah. And college too, just Friday I did
College.
one at
Oh, great.
university. No,
Awesome.
but it depends on what they want. And with the kids, it's often I'll talk about whatever animal. If we're doing the elephant's new shoe or something, I'll often talk about sort of the genesis of that book, but also show the prosthetic, and show some of the interesting things about elephants, because everybody loves elephants. For the Orangutan Houdini, I talk a lot about animal intelligence, and about I mentioned the palm oil issue, so that people know why these animals might be traded in the first place, but also about animal intelligence, both in the wild and in zoos, because there's really interesting things about orangutans in particular. They have a whole culture. They use not only just use tools, but they have culture like using napkins, building umbrellas. I mean, it's really interesting. So many things. And then in zoos, they're able to look at language, use of money for exchange. I mean, it's really just like the research is amazing. And then you can relate that to movement and how different apes will move, and how orangutans are often just moving very slowly because they're taking things in. So I'll show a 2-minute clip of from Planet of the Apes, from the guy who's a movement coach for Planet of the Apes. I have to say, this clip is amazing. You can Google it for Planet of the Apes movement coach, and in like less than 2 minutes, he goes through chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, and from that you can get a real sense of the personalities and the differences in environment, the differences in their intelligence and their activities from their movement. It's really amazing.
Wow.
Everybody will Google it tonight.
Yeah.
It's so quick. It is really good.
Wow. So that's great. So because you have so many, you have this wealth of knowledge from having done so much writing on these topics you're passionate about, you can bring so much into your school visits depending on the age of the kids. And do you ever ask teachers ahead of time, what kinds of things do you want me to talk about? Or do you go in with a set presentation?
No, I always do, because it depends on their curriculum. It depends on the age. Sometimes if kids are really, I've never had one yet where kids aren't just like popping out with questions. So I always try and leave a lot of time for questions, because that always will lead me, first of all, it's their interest, but I'll always have something to respond to. But generally, just to get this party started, start with some presentation and pictures or something, or videos. I do a lot of multimedia stuff.
Awesome. Well, that just sounds amazing. So I want to get to a few questions here. First of all, Susan's asking, your podcast that you had, are all those episodes on your website that we can hear them?
They are linked to my website. Yeah. So.
And what was the name of it? Like if people are searching for it?
It's called The Wildlife.
The Wildlife.
I think it's called The Wildlife with Laurel Neme to make it better searchable. But the link should be on my website.
Okay.
And it was available on iTunes as well. So, but they should all be there.
Okay, great. So Kathy's saying, what's a day like in your life?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, I live, one of the things that keeps me very busy is we have this very active German Shepherd dog who is a high energy, super intelligent. Speaking of animal intelligence, he's so intelligent. So I actually, parts of the day are always walking and training him. In fact, I trained him how to do the laundry. So, and now,
how did you do that?
Yeah, so he loves the laundry. Oh my gosh, he just adores. He loves having a job and he loves doing the laundry. And so then we also do searches, because he has a really good nose. So we do a lot of searching for different toys or things outside, or yeah. So and then I spend a lot of time currently on the phone related to this Nat Geo piece. And because I work internationally, always the time change. So often I'm up really early dealing with my writing partner on the Okavango series is in South Africa. So it's a 7-hour time change. So we're always like I'm up early and he's up late. So trying to
yeah, that's tough. Wow. Well, at least your day doesn't include laundry if your dog's doing it for you. So that's
no, it takes longer with him than without him. But
Does he iron as well? I mean, I think
I
that's
thought about teaching him that, but like I purposely did not teach him how to turn on the machine because he would be like doing it all the time. And I have not taught him how to get anything from the fridge because they
yeah,
do.
that's a good choice there. um, oh, this is interesting. From Johnny Ray asks us, name a couple of ways in which you see how global warming or climate change has affected the writings you're so passionate about. So that's interesting. Like when you're writing about certainly science and that sort of thing, the way the world changes has got to affect, I assume, often the topics you're writing about and the kind of research you're doing. Do you have to constantly be on top of those things?
Well, I think for the kids' books, for the and kid-related articles, it probably enters a little less so. I mean, I am always thinking about it. For this current series on the Okavango, the oil exploration in the Okavango area, first of all, it's a climate change hotspot. It's really water scarce. They've had like 3 emergency level droughts in the last decade. So, and originally the oil exploration was going to be, the production was planned to be fracking, which makes everything, extracts a lot of water. So water availability in this very desert climate permeates everything. And it's sort of why I got interested in this. I mean, I had done my dissertation research in that region and I lived there, so I know it very well. And then to see this, it's a problematic thing, let alone actually that it's oil if you're trying to move away from fossil fuels. So yeah, it permeates a lot of things, and it's a lot of things.
Yeah, that's a whole interview in and of itself. I'm sure we could talk about just that topic for an hour. So I saw a great. So as far as the length of your picture books, we always hear about publishers want picture books to be as short as possible, and with fiction, definitely they're way under 1,000 words. But with nonfiction, generally you've got a little more leeway there. But your texts are still pretty spare. Do you know sort of where you hit on the word count for your picture books?
Generally around 500. I mean, I think my writing has evolved. So initially I was writing much longer. Initially I couldn't put something in less than 1,300 words, I think. And maybe get it down to 1,000 or something. But I think that the writing gets better often when it's shorter, because you have to have the heart there, you have to have the story there, and a lot of the extraneous stuff falls away. And you also do what you're supposed to do with picture books, is let the stories, a lot of the story be told from the pictures. And so I actually like, I think that improves my writing to cut it. So I still try and keep it. And because it's narrative,
So
other kinds of expository nonfiction, it still comes, I think they often like it shorter too.
yes, because some of the information is conveyed through the pictures. Is there more leeway when you're writing nonfiction to insert art notes in the manuscript? Did you do that, or do you just, have faith that the illustrator will depict everything accurately?
I think it depends on the situation. The Elephant's New Shoe, I didn't have any art notes. Other manuscripts I do, if it's not conveyed, if the story has to progress through the picture versus through the words. If something is better conveyed through the picture, but it wouldn't be obvious. But I think also with nonfiction, at least in my with the Scholastic, I mean, they let me review the pictures, and anything that was inaccurate. The artist was amazing, Ariel Landry. She was amazing at,
Mhm.
first of all, at doing her own research. So I think people want it to be accurate. And then where it wasn't, like there's
Mhm.
illustrations of an x-ray of a foot, and she had a back foot versus a front foot. So she had done that, but the x-ray she had sort of used as a reference. So, so she switched it up. So now it's the right kind of x-ray. And, so like really
Right.
detailed things that nobody
Right.
would notice, but unless you do. So.
Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 Well, that's good. That's good that they do that. I think most publishers with nonfiction, they would definitely let the author review the illustrations for those reasons. Yeah, because you've done so much research. So here's an interesting question from Bill. He said, I'm working on a picture book biography of a famous African big game hunter who killed thousands of animals in the early 20th century, drawing a link between that and modern conservation. Do you think this would be too violent for kids, for the picture book audience? And we had talked about, a lot of it's the way you present it and where you start the story. So do you think that there are ways to tell that story for the picture book audience?
Oh, I would think that there definitely are ways to do it. I mean, there are picture books
Mhm.
about Teddy Roosevelt. He was a big hunter. And so, I'm sure that there are good ways to tell that story. I think it depends on
Mhm.
what you're wanting to convey, and you know, what
Mhm. Mhm.
what the purpose of it is. So, and there's so many different ways in. Um, so is it too violent for kids? I mean, I think it depends on what you're doing with it. I guess that's, I don't think it has to be.
Yeah, I
I,
think,
I think it could be really good.
and there are other picture books. Yeah, there's other nonfiction picture books out there on topics like this. Like you said, Teddy Roosevelt, that would be a great place to start. Books about his hunting and his activities and see how that's handled. But yeah, it's sort of, what is the purpose of your book? Is conservation really the main thing that you're writing about? Then this hunting is almost a a way to get into the story. It's not the whole focus of the story. So it's how you handle it that's more important, I think. Okay, well, Laurel, I know it's late there and I don't want to keep you any longer. Do you have any final parting bits of advice for our viewers who are maybe hoping to build a career like yours
Well, I
around
think
their passions?
yeah, I mean, I think if you're passionate about something, I mean, I often, you might be told no 27 million times, but if it's a story that you want to tell it, because I think, even if you're told
Mhm.
no, maybe some of it is just in the way it's told, and you need time to let it simmer for you, or figure out how to come into the story or something. But if it's
Mhm.
what you want to say, if it's if it's a heart book, from your it's something that you feel it needs to be said, then you should
Yeah,
definitely say it
yeah.
and get it out there,
Mhm.
and you'll
Mhm.
find a way.
And I think also, I totally agree. And I think also, as you've done, finding ways to spin the things that you're interested in into a wide author platform. You're published in lots of different venues and markets, and that is always appealing to a publisher. But it keeps you writing, always about the things that you love, and I think that's great. That's great.
and, and also, if one thing goes
So thank you
badly,
so much for being.
oh, thanks. I was just going to say, if one thing goes badly, you can turn to
Yes.
another manuscript.
There you go. Yep, yep. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Laurel. And everybody go to laurelneme.com. It's Laurel, Neme.com, her website, and check out all of her articles, her books, info on her school presentations. She's fascinating person to have come in and talk to your classroom. Thank you so much, and we're keeping our fingers crossed for the Pulitzer, and I hope you let us know, and we will see you. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Have a good evening, and we will see you on the next social, Kidlit Social. Bye.